And Adria is bringing us in with music.
That is
I
correct.
am, but I want to thank Cantor Nemi for making this suggestion. And Cantor Nemi, would you like to say a word about this?
Just that we have the phrase from Psalm 9, Yishpot Tevel B'tzedek in Psalm 98 as well, which we recite this text on Friday evenings. And I also thought it was nice for Adria because it says Zamru Adonai B'chinor, so it was kind of like a double resonance there.
Thank you very much.
Wow, Adria, so beautiful. Can we leave that on the screen for a moment, Babette? Or you, who is doing it? Yael, are you doing it? Oh, Babette, could you put it back on? So this beautiful psalm, as Cantor Nimi said, Psalm 98 is one of the psalms for Kabbalat Shabbat. The psalms for Kabbalat Shabbat are a group from the 90s, literally from this number 90s. And this 98, which we often sing, is beautiful. And by now, if we could see the bottom, so you see the last couplet there. These are all words that by the time we get there, and maybe we're going to do the Shabbat Psalms a little out of order, but here, Kiva lishbot haaretz. Lishbot is that shoresh shin pei tet that we've discussed a lot in our current Psalm of 9. Is a shofet is a judge, Beit HaMishpat is a court, mishpat is a sentence or a judgment. And for the psalmist, judgment means justice. It doesn't mean corruption, it means justice. So there will be a time when the earth, haaretz, the earth will be filled with justice. Yishbot tevel b'tzedek. Yishbot is the verbal form. When the earth will be judged, when all the peoples, tevel, all the nations, everybody will be judged with justice, the amim b'meisharim, and all the peoples so where there we have tevel, amim, which are two of our words, b'meisharim, with righteousness. So it's an aspirational image which follows our discussion from yesterday of what does it mean to talk about transcendence or divinity in our world. For the psalmist, it means when there is justice. So anyway, so that's a beautiful, so as we get to learn these words, you'll see them repeat in all different ways as a theme. So that, Adria, that was just beautiful. And I love the selection because that first line, yes, indeed, Zamru, Zemer, Mizmor, Zamir, Chorale, etc., that the Shoresh, Zayin Memresh, is to sing, or Ladonai Bechinor, with a harp or a stringed instrument. So beautiful to hear you on that, Adria. Thank you.
Well, again, kudos to Jacob
Yes,
for suggesting
thank you.
it. And
Beautiful
for all the
suggestion.
years,
Beautiful to hear it on strings.
when you're in an orchestra rehearsal in Israel and the conductor wants to yell at the violins, he'll say kinor, kinor, So
Yes, it is a real word with a real, so it's,
Yeah.
but it's to hear the strings actually play it so beautiful.
So Menetzeach is the conductor, and
Yeah.
he's yelling at the violins, kinor, kinor.
See, there you go.
Stink.
All right. All right. Thank you for that. Thanks for that screen. Well, hello, everybody. Good morning to everybody. I hope you are all well. Some of you I saw last night, we had a beautiful welcome Zoom session for some of our new members. And a couple of folks from our Psalms class have joined the synagogue. So Jim, are you here? Jim Brule? Jim was there last night, and Jim is a new member. And what I learned last night, Jim, tell us where you live.
I live in Syracuse, New York, and it's actually brulee. Like
oh, brulee. Sorry, brulee.
Crunchy
right.
On the outside, sweet on the inside.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for correcting my pronunciation, Jim Brulee. So Jim is joining us from Syracuse and has joined the synagogue as a member. And I think there is Jessica here today. She was also last night on our call. Jessica Bathurst, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, also joined from the Psalms class. So wonderful to have new members who have found their way to CBST in this time of pandemic and from studying Psalms together. So Jim, really happy to have you. And you've been a wonderful part of our community of Psalms studiers. So welcome. Jim, you want to tell the group a little bit what you told us last night about being a Maggid, which is beautiful.
Yeah, so I'm a Maggid, which is a inspirational storyteller in our tradition. I've taken a traditional route down there, so I've received smicha, and I teach people of many faiths to become spiritual storytellers. I'm most involved in interfaith and Black Lives Matters things. I work nationally with a lot of that work. So I think stories are the way we open our hearts and make changes within and between us.
Beautiful. So happy to have you, Jim. So is there anybody else here who was there last night? I don't know if Jessica's here today. She said, Sally and Lynn. Do you want to say something about our session last night?
Yes, I thought it was.
They're not new members. You, Sally, and Lynn are not new members. But
I thought that it was really very intimate. I was surprised how nicely the room breaking up made it, very intimate. Had a nice chat with a few people. I really thought it was great.
Great. So welcome new members. And for those of you who are not yet members of the synagogue, please consider becoming part of the community formally. And we have no financial barrier to that. We ask people to just choose whatever you can offer. Okay, so let's get back to Psalm 9. So any thoughts? Did anybody attempt to try and do this Psalm personally yesterday? Because I thought it was a challenge because so many people were experiencing the external enemies so clearly. So did anybody try that?
I did.
So Robin, how was it for you to do that? The process of?
How was the process? It touched me a lot more working on it. I mean, this particular Psalm has touched me deeply, but I actually, I'm not from the criers, and I actually, I was touched pretty deeply on working on it. So I was glad that you gave us that challenge.
And what part of it struck that deeply?
I started out with the line, I think it's verse 16, the nations sink in the pit they have made, their own foot is caught in the net they have hidden. And I started out talking about the shame I feel with our nation and how that poisons my soul. And then taking it to the personal level of how I get caught in my own net, and then coming out the other end of that there are these paths that we're given, and if we can pay attention. So that's
beautiful.
So it was a good process. I'm glad I did it, and I actually submitted it. So it's my first time of writing anything. So
fantastic. Yes, and so I think we're going to say submissions should go in by Sunday evening at 5, because on Monday we're going to start our personal Psalm 9s. We have some hands raised, but now thank you for that, Robin. Whenever, and I'll say this, whenever you feel blocked by what the psalmist is trying to say, the first step is to try and put it in your words in a personal way. Don't accept the block. In other words, don't say, okay, this is not meaningful to me. Try the next level of attempt, so to speak. Really because the languages are so difficult to access, and it's so easy to say, this has nothing to do with me. This is about some really bizarre, primitive, ancient language of fighting enemies, and I don't believe it. I don't believe in that kind of God. I don't believe in that kind of language. So before you reject it entirely as having meaning, the first thing to do is to say, okay, let's pretend, or so to speak, how can this sentence be about my life, my experience? What can I do with it? And I can come very close to promising you there is not a single psalm in the 150 that you will not be able to do that with. And as you're developing the level of skills you all are now developing, it's going to, as Robin described, there's going to be a phrase, a sentence, maybe not every sentence in every psalm. You know what I mean? It's not going to be every single pixelated dot, but I promise you, there's going to be something that will leap out and grab you by the kishkas and say, this is talking about, or to, or from me. It takes work on our part because, as we've learned, there are a lot of different obstacles. So let's look. Anybody else want to talk about the process? We're going to, and please then submit them, and we're going to start studying all the personal psalms next week. But now I want to hear if anybody else tried it. What was that process like, or were you able to? Maybe you couldn't do it. So does anybody else want to offer something?
I see, I know Sarah Siegel's had her hand up for quite a while.
Oh, thank you, Babette. Sorry, yeah, I'm not looking at the hair. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all good. So Sarah, Sarah
Sure.
Siegel?
I'm sorry for the crying cat in the background.
Sarah, where are you now? Sarah's on her way to, Sarah and Pat are on their way to Memphis. So
Here's Pat.
thanks for driving, Pat. We don't want Sarah to drive while she's in the Psalms.
That's right. It says Lenhartsville, Pennsylvania. We're about 30 miles outside of here, the exit to turn on Harrisburg, somewhere around there. So I had such a good time with this psalm because of COVID-19, we made sure to buy a house with an in-ground pool where we're going in Memphis. And so it became a case of God being Pat's and my lifeguard, sitting in a lifeguard chair by the pool, surveying the whole neighborhood for us and making sure the bad neighbors moved away. And you'll see when I read the rest of it, but it was so helpful to me. As usual, I was able to take it to something that's going on right now, you know, our fears and excitement around moving. So it was great for me.
Okay, well, we look forward to seeing it next week. All right,
Thanks.
who else has hands up? And hope your cat's okay.
Stacy Harris.
Rabbi, I followed directions. I raised my hand with the thank you.
Stacy, yay! Let's get Stacy.
Actually, you said something earlier. Sometimes you don't have to do dot for dot, you know, or line for line. And I haven't written in a while. I usually sometimes write anyway. And I wrote something this morning. I didn't realize that we had to submit it. So, but okay. And it
I wanted you all to start this process.
Yeah, no, it was really actually. I tend to do that, like like early in the morning or something like that. Just that's how I do things. But it was. I just appreciated a quick thing of what you said about Shaol yesterday, and that's something that I included in my writing. So I just wanted to thank you for that.
Wonderful. So is Regina in the class today? Regina or Leah? I see Leah. I don't know if Regina's here, but I love that in an email. I had a very bad tech day yesterday, and Regina sent me an email, a follow-up to a meeting I had with her, and she said, "I'm sorry you had a Shaol tech day." So I very much appreciated using what we learned in Psalms to describe my my tech day yesterday. It was a bad one. Anyway, so yes, everybody should submit by Sunday. So even if you started yesterday but you're not done, that's the job. So let's go through the hands, and then we're going to look at Gaia Bernstein's psalm.
Okay, and Gail, I know it says Gail's iPad, so Gail, if you want to mute yourself, that'd be great.
I changed the name on there, by the way.
It still says Gail's iPad, but I love you anyway.
So funny. Okay, thank you. So this was the first time I tried to write, and I think it was particularly what you said, Rabbi, about kind of transcendence and understanding God in that way, you know, where it is a part of you, not so much this figure looming up in the sky.
Right.
That's paternal and judgmental.
Yeah.
That it
Don't
really,
want that.
I totally had a breakthrough given my background, which was very mixed, both very religious and not.
Yeah.
And in my psalm, I wrote about that experience. And I have to say, it was such a breakthrough for me.
Fantastic. I can't wait to see it, Gail.
Yeah, it really, finally, I got it.
Fantastic. Well, we're gonna have a great time next week.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So let's
Thank
take
you,
a couple
everybody.
more hands, and then we're gonna look at Bernstein's, and then we'll open up the class again for discussion.
Okay, next up, Peter Klein.
Whenever I read the Psalms, I'm never sure that I understand what's going on or I have any interest in it. And then I wake up the next morning and start writing furiously. Usually it comes either as a hallucination or completely cinematic. In this case, it was cinematic. And I've already posted it in the Facebook book, but it was quite traumatic writing it. When I heard the poem, I essentially heard it. I didn't write it per se. I heard it mostly in Yiddish and in German, and then I translated some of it. And I confess that I'm not fluent in either of them. So there's a follow-up note of one of the sections transliterated in original Yiddish because it was so overwhelming. There's a lot of edit going on, but I don't know if it's complete. And it's more traumatic than I thought. But it's
okay.
You'll see.
Yeah, great. Yeah, trauma is a part of life, right? Also.
Yeah. And it's not mine, but it's sort of our collective or another moment in history.
Well, I talked about Friday night. I don't know if you heard my Drosh Friday night, but there's a really fascinating piece in the Talmud in Yevamot about describing this period of time of being an Av as being there's both collective mourning and personal mourning, and there are different kinds of mourning, and we Jews carry a collective mourning, which is as real as a personal loss. And yeah, so anyway, it's a very
this covers both quite vividly. So thank you.
And you know, there's a lot of work now being done. I forgot what it's called, where people carry earlier traumas in our bodies. There's a whole concept of that, but are people familiar with that? Can somebody say something more intelligent than what I just said about that? That it's not, even if you don't know the information, which is true.
Rabbi, there's a whole school called somatic therapies, which take a look at the bodily reaction to what's going on, say in therapy session, and focusing on that that aspect. And that's what
but that stuff from earlier, like for instance, like a lot of children of Holocaust survivors, they might not even know the stories, they might not even know the details, but it gets passed down. But
Rabbi, so I mean, I've read, this is Lisa, hi, I've read that that trauma is genetic. That it actually gets transmitted into gene expression.
And that the whole area of all thing is specifically a physiotherapy relating to emotional trauma.
There's some indication that the trauma will permanently affect and may affect what's passed on more than just psychological, but also like what Lisa said. That a lot of that, it's sort of iffy, the basis of some of that, but it definitely seems to be believed that the body carries the trauma in it, and you can access the trauma through therapies that are not necessarily talking therapies.
Judy, do you just want to say what you did professionally before you retired, just so folks know?
Oh, I was the sister of my brother who's done research in this, but other than that, I'm a nurse and a psychotherapist, and So, so I know a lot about it, but we did have my brother talk in March. The committee came in and had him talk about trauma, transgenerational trauma in Israel and the United States.
So, but isn't it incredible that I think the rabbis in the Talmud understood that by when they talked about that we carry always a collective trauma, and Tisha B'Av is a day of mourning about the collective trauma, which exists alongside personal trauma, that they understood. I mean, obviously they didn't talk about it with the DNA and genes, but they understood that we're always carrying trauma of the collective, even if we don't intellectually understand that. I find that very deeply moving. And it's interesting to me that there's current scientific understanding of these things that's going deeper and deeper. Okay, we're just going to do a couple of more and then get to this psalm, and then we'll see if there is more room.
All right,
So in order, well.
The term is called post-traumatic stress.
No, that's a little bit different. That Michael, that's a little different. What we're talking about is not even trauma. Let's say on a simple level, let's say, so Yael Bat Chava, as an example, is the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. She herself did not go through the Holocaust, but there is a way that she has inherited and maybe even genetically inherited the trauma of her parents. Even if they never talked, even if they never told her a story that would psychologically impact her. There's an understanding that trauma can be passed down from generation to generation, and not just psychologically, but actually physically. And there's, as Judy's saying, there's even some evidence that genetically the genes can get messed up and get passed down. So post-traumatic stress disorder means an individual is responding, is carrying for a long time the residue of a traumatic experience where the trauma itself might be over, but the impact of that trauma lasts a lifetime.
There's changes in cortisol level in the brain when you experience trauma, and that they did research, maybe 5 or 6 years ago they came out with this, that gets passed down from generation to generation, which I think has great implications for Jews, since over many, many generations, there's been so much trauma. We probably all have that going on. And then we respond, with anxiety and all kinds of things.
We're not an anxious group of people. No. We're very calm. And okay, so let's, two more comments and then back to the psalm.
Yael, you've unmuted, so you're next in line. Go ahead.
So on a very kind of different topic, the word Sheol shows up in this psalm, and I'm wondering if it's related to the word She'elah, which is question.
I have never thought about that.
And this made me think about the word Lucifer. So bear with me for a moment.
Okay.
Lucifer in Latin actually means morning star or light bringing. So Lucifer asked questions of God and became the devil because Lucifer was not adhering to the norm or what was expected. Lucifer was bringing questions. So I'm wondering if Sheol and Lucifer are related in that way. Somebody who brings in the light through questions, and that's why they're demonized.
Wow, I've never thought about that. We need somebody in the class to take on researching Sheol more. I don't really know. I've never thought of the connection of Sheol and She'elah. That is a really, really interesting question. And it might be, I just have never studied it. Anybody want to take that on as a little personal research project?
Rabbi, Sheol appears in the Torah in Korach.
Oh yeah, it appears all through the Tanakh. This is not, for sure, this is not the only appearance, but I've never really studied, it would take just reading a few articles about it, but I haven't never done it.
There's some great commentary on Sheol in the introduction to Adele Berlin's commentary on Echa, on her translation of Lamentations that I've been reading in preparation for Tisha B'Av. If I find some comments on it,
Can you look at that, and maybe on Monday or Tuesday you could just tell us?
Yeah, I'll start posting some stuff in the Facebook group.
Fantastic. I just don't know. That's a fantastic question. All right, let's look at Bernstein, just because we're already at 10:25 and we'll open it up for more questions. So we're going to look at Bernstein. Now, as I've described to you, Bernstein, oh, I don't know if we got the whole thing there, but I'll read it if we don't. Bernstein is the most personal in some ways. And as a reminder, she is an Orthodox woman, lives on the Upper West Side, and she's a doctor. And she writes beautifully in her introduction how she was moved to see some of the parents of her patients reciting Psalms. And then she took on, in this book, going through each Psalm and writing what it personally meant to her. Okay, so this is her now let's look at this. So it's using she's a contemporary New Yorker, so she's not using archaic language at all. But she understands the Hebrew. So she's definitely working from the Hebrew. So when we look at it, we'll try and understand what she's doing. But let's look, and this is not the only way, of course, to read it, but it is her personal one. So I'll read this out loud as we look at her very personal look at Psalm 9. I wanted you all to kind of look at it personally first so that you don't, so you see different ways of doing it. Okay. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you for this miracle. Thank you with all my heart. Anyone listening, I'm shouting, singing, this miracle was wrought by God. My enemies are in retreat, trapped in their own nets, drowning in their own slime, sliding into hell. Who are they to have presumed their own power? They control nothing. You rule, terrifying them, show them that they die. You searched my heart, heard my case, judged justly, crushed my foes, each one of them now toothless, swordless, impotent, wiped out. Infinite, eternally, your truth remains resplendent. And though we are ephemeral, we seek you. We know you are not deaf to human cries indefinitely. Okay, that is a pretty different read than the Levy or the Safaria translation. So let's look at this a little bit and where she gets this from. Okay, so where does she get all the thank yous from? The thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for this miracle. Back in the Hebrew, we see. So first of all, she skips over, she doesn't include the superscription. She sees the superscription as only instructions, and she doesn't see that as part of her personal psalm. So she goes right into verse 2. So where does this explosion of gratitude come from? This explosion of thank yous. And so what she does in her English is to use thank you, thank you, thank you over and over again to reflect the Hebrew, which says, Odeh Hashem, I will thank God with all my heart. So first of all, that first verse says, I will thank God with all my heart. You could see her thinking and saying, if I say with all my heart, it sounds too liturgical almost. She wants to get at what it would be, what it would sound like to say thank you with all my heart. So what she's doing is saying, thank you, God, thank you, God. The repetition is getting to the idea of b'chol libi. Like she's actually doing it. She's not just telling you about it, because I think she thinks the phrase with all my heart sounds a little hackneyed, maybe, a little much like it's a quotation. Asapra kol niflotecha. So thank you for this miracle. So she's repeating the thank you, thank you, thank you. And for niflotecha, instead of saying for your heart, for your wonders, but then she says, thank you with all my heart. So she takes the phrase, thank you with all my heart, but she doesn't want that to be, I'm interpreting. She is not obviously telling us why she wrote it. I'm telling you what I think. So she's taking this phrase, thank you with all my heart, but after she's actually doing the intensification of thank you. So she's kind of doing this, and then that's how she's trying to make it sound like she's thanking God with all my heart, and then all my heart. Anyone listening, I'm shouting, singing, this miracle was wrought by God. Now, the shouting, singing, we get from the Esmacha, the Azamra, the El Tzcha. So she has this over and over again. But where do we get the wrought? Why did, of all the language here, this is what I think, by the way, she has no commentary here. So I think it's interesting. The only word in this whole psalm that's a little bit of an archaic English word. You know, none of us native English speakers would use the word wrought in our language, would we? Is there anybody on this call, on this Zoom class, who is a native English speaker who would use the word wrought in normal speech? I don't think so. If you are, good for you. You're a better human being than the rest of us, but nobody uses the word wrought. Every other word in this psalm I could see being used, although resplendent, you know, I'm not sure I've ever used the word resplendent. I do use ephemeral because I talk about religion, but wrought is the most liturgical or ancient, kind of archaic word. And I think the reason she's using it is because of the word niflotecha. Because for a religious Jew, as I said, even when we were talking about the word niflotecha, it immediately, I think, conjures up the Al Hanisim, where we talk about the miracles and the wonders, and that's always translated, the miracles and wonders which you wrought. So I think she's actually even quoting that Al Hanisim translation. The miracle was wrought by God. So referring to these, and the Al Hanisim is referring to these big miracles. She's talking about miracles in her life. And for her, my enemies are in retreat. She's not talking now politically. She's talking about the things that have, I believe, that have defeated her in life. And they're trapped in their own nets, drowning in their own slime, sliding into hell. So she's translating Sheol into a very American English word. Who are they to have presumed their own power? In other words, she's creating this contrast between enemies which understand power to be bigger than God. They control nothing. You, meaning the Holy One, the Transcendent One, rule. Show them they die means, from the psalm we see over and over again, the contrast between mortality and immortality. Human beings, if we understand we are on this earth for a limited amount of time, that should teach us humility and limitation. And in her eyes here, the enemies have hubris. You searched my heart, heard my case, judged justly. Crushed my foes, each one of them now toothless, swordless, impotent, wiped out. Infinite eternally. So here again, the contrast between things that are ephemeral, things that are finite, things that pass, and those things which are eternal. Your truth remains resplendent. And though we are ephemeral, we seek you. We know you're not deaf. Where does she get that from? At the end of Psalm 9, there is a sense that we will be heard, and you are not deaf to human cries indefinitely, because we have here, Kilo lanetzach yishachach evion, for not forever will the needy be forgotten, nor the hope of the poor perish forever. And then the final verse is, Enosh hema sela, they are but men. We seek you. No, you are not deaf to human cries indefinitely. All right, I just wanted to complete that as an example of this, and let's now, we have a few minutes to open it up to questions or comments, but I wanted to make sure that we covered. Did everybody get the Bernstein in the original packet from Harold? No. Yes or no? Yes. Okay, so you should have this in that original packet if you want to look back at it. All right, so let's get any comments or questions. Raise your hand electronically, and Babette will call on you on order.
Okay, Ellen Poster has her hand up first.
So I missed studying the first 10 or so verses of Psalm 9 because I was in Chicago. So I was trying to study them, and I was looking at Le'itot Bat Sarah, times of trouble, and trying to understand it. And I wound up finding stuff about it in an auction house called Kadem. And it had prayers for cessation of cholera epidemic, Le'itot Bet Sarah, from 1848. It was done by a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov. And what it was is you take your own city where the epidemic is, and you use the acrostic for the letters of your city, and using 119, and make your own a prayer against times of trouble. And I just thought it was so interesting. I just wanted to share it.
That has a great tradition in Judaism, as well as taking your own name and doing an acrostic with Psalms using your own name. Beautiful. Thank you, Ellen. By the way, all the classes are recorded on the CBST website if you want to listen to any of the earlier ones.
Thanks,
All right.
Rabbi.
Donna Gray, you're up next. Please unmute yourself.
So I want to get back to the trauma in the body.
Okay.
So the last time that I was at the synagogue on 30th Street was the day that Judy's brother came. And about 10 years ago, I trained in something called somatic experiencing. And so I didn't know that who Judy's brother was, but I had studied him 10 years ago. And the person who was the originator of the course is a good friend of his. So like I was like shocked and amazed and thrilled that I stumbled upon Judy's brother at CBST.
Does Judy's brother have a name?
Stephen Porges.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Stephen Porges, who is really a pioneer in this movement and a great scholar and has offered wonderful insights into therapy. And one thing I want to say is that sometimes if I'm talking to someone in a session and they talk about something that they're feeling, I might ask them, where do you feel that in your body? And then, because if you think about an emotion, it often manifests as a physical sensation. And then, you know, that can offer tons of information. And if you think also of ideas that are just coming from your head, as opposed to ideas that are embodied, to get the full richness with the emotions and the physical sensation of what you're feeling, it takes on a whole other level of depth than if it's just coming from the top of your head. That's
wow. Wow, great, thank you.
All right, Shep, you're next. Please unmute yourself.
Well, what I have to say is like kind of meaningless, but I'm just amazed that something an individual can personally experience, acquire, can be passed on. You know, I just find that unbelievable. That's it. It's amazing.
Thank you, Shep.
Very simple-minded, but it's amazing to me.
There's a lot of study going on now about it.
All right, Simon and Sherry, unmute yourself.
There we go. So both Sherry and I noticed that in the middle section of this, the way it's laid out on the page.
The Bernstein one.
In Bernstein, yes. Where it sort of goes away. Each line becomes shorter and shorter, visually reinforcing that erasure of the foes. I know Sherry uses this in her poetry, and we immediately noticed that she was doing.
Yes, I did do. I really like that she uses the actual format to emphasize what the words are meaning, but the shape of the sound of the poem is the song. I know, I love that. I think that's so creative.
She literally wipes it out.
Yeah, she literally wipes it out, exactly, yeah. And then it goes back the next line, infinite eternally is longer than actually going, if you look back up, it goes, the now toothless is shorter, like it reinstates, so to speak, the length of the line.
Mm-hmm.
Great, I love that, fantastic.
Okay, Sarah Sloan, you're next. Go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Folks, if you have your hand up, why don't you unmute yourself now so we'll be able to shift quickly so we don't, great.
This may not be as profound, but I'm also looking at the Bernstein, and I am touched very much how she takes a psalm that's practically unreadable in Hebrew and in some of the other translations and makes it almost into a contemporary piece of poetry.
Absolutely.
I own a Bernstein, and I have the habit now of just before we start a new psalm of reading it in Bernstein to sort of get a Cliff Notes idea of what, says the librarian, of what we're going to be talking about.
Beautiful. It's one very, and that's why I like it a lot, that she has, and she's done all 150.
All right, Noreen.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up, because it keeps, this psalm is really difficult and very much moved me and felt like it really addressed what I'm feeling this summer and the darkness from COVID and other things. But what I was thinking a lot about is and Rabbi, I would love your comments on it. It's about, you know what you know. We had a thing in the Army training we talked a lot about before disasters, whatever. You know what you know what you don't know, but it's what you don't know that you don't know that will bite you.
Wow.
And I
that's
feel her addressing God. And that drives me. So I keep feeling when I use the word God or the infinite, is I'm very respectful of how big that is. And that how human ego and hubris throughout history has driven destruction of other peoples, our own people, and the planet. And we are now at a tipping point that our evilness may in fact, and anyway, so I just wanted to address that. I felt that I love this poem because I think too often we want to reduce God to human.
Yeah.
Rather than.
I think that's such an interesting point. And when we look throughout history, you know, some religious expressions have really focused on the grandeur and on the enormity of God. I mean, think about a cathedral, right? The whole reason that cathedrals are built to be these, for sure in, you know, medieval Christian Europe, there was nothing that approached the size of a cathedral anywhere in society, right? I mean, the cathedral was visually the largest thing on a landscape. And when you entered a cathedral, still, I mean, now if you enter a cathedral, how many other spaces are we in as people where the ceilings are that high, where there's, except maybe, you know, a sports stadium or but a cathedral, the idea of a cathedral is to feel the majesty and to feel the smallness of human and the contrast it's supposed to, and it's very beautiful. But on the other hand, our contemporary world is very uncomfortable often with that level of the majestic part of God. And we want to have a very, very casual, you know, guitar playing, small circles, very intimate. And I think God would, and I hate the word God because of all of the reasons I've said, but I think that power in the universe is both, right? It's both. It's not an either or. And in different moments in history and different places of our lives, we have more access sometimes to one or the other because of a gazillion reasons. And I you know, I'm going to stop talking because I know there are other hands raised, but I think this contrast, and in theological terms, we use these different terms of transcendent for that majestic sense of grandeur, and immanence for the intimate, very, very personal, very internal sense of the Holy One. So that in theological language gets discussed a lot about a transcendent form of the Holy One and an immanent form. And Judaism embraces both, but in different, but okay, let's see who else is there.
All right, we're at 7:45 right now, so we want to quickly get through these last two.
Let's do Marcia. I see Marcia.
Marcia, gotcha.
And then that'll be it for today.
I don't know. Okay, this is, you know, I got to thinking as I was on a long journey driving about the length of the Psalms, and in part because I was moved to look at a later Psalm, much later Psalm, and I thought, what about the seasons? In biblical times, I know we use the Psalms in prayer through the seasons in the Jewish calendar, but how were they used then? And how were they written? And, you know, progression, etc. I mean, you get my question. But
yes. Well, how Psalms were used in biblical times, we only have very limited understanding. Most of it is around the temple. And because liturgy wasn't as important, most of the worship of, most of the expression of biblical religion, as we call it, was in the temple sacrificial system of sacrificing animals and grain and things like that. And the Psalms we know were used to welcome pilgrims up to the Temple Mount. We don't really have a sense of prayer life until much later. So you can't even really much talk about it than that. But I am going to do a whole session, which we haven't scheduled it, for the Psalms in prayer, much more detailed and deep than we've done so far. But that's it for today. And Marcia, we could we'll come back to that. But that's the quick answer.
Yeah. Okay,
but we'll do a bigger answer about how the Psalms are used in Jewish prayer life and when they started getting used.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Adria, so folks, get your Psalms into. We have the email. Annika's email is in the chat by Sunday at 5 to be included for our Psalm 9 personal study next week.
Okay, since we're a little bit late, I'll just play through the first verse if you're going to follow along there.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you, Adria. That is just gorgeous. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. See you tomorrow night at services, I hope. And we have a very special treat. Emily Bernstein Dunkel is going to speak tomorrow night at services about her experience with Seeds for Peace. Seeds of Peace. Seeds of or for.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Have a good day.